Many people are wondering nowadays what is it that is going on in the world? What is it that's happening? Because a lot of people tend finally to feel that something is not right, something is not the same. And indeed, times have been changing for a long time, but it is finally a situation in which people actually change. People feel a bit more alive, and people actually feel more in tune with life. Well, it's gonna take a lot of time. It's gonna take years for some to actually accept the changes, but people are starting to actually step into their own power, to realize that thousands of years of programming to constantly shift your attention away from yourself and to always give it to something else, to institutions, to powers, to forms of culture and rituals and all sorts of things that ultimately may or may not actually help you. And well, this includes religion, this includes your own culture, this includes traditions, this includes toxic family relationships, toxic relationships in working environments, and well, so on and so forth. Because after thousands of years of ignorance, people have forgotten what it means to have a true family. Yes, a regular family has lived through the traumas and the such, but unfortunately, it can only work for a certain period of time because everything that a generation cannot transcend, it will give further. And the newer generations will be forced to deal with those. Nowadays, we're realizing that there are so many issues with the people that we start tending, at least tending, not necessarily working towards actively, but tending towards finding solutions in which these issues have to be solved. Because there are wars everywhere, because some people can't live beyond their what we call the ego, and they just want others to suffer equally. See, misery is the only pandemic in the world. When there are miserable people, everyone else will also suffer indirectly, especially when these miserable people reach places of power, which has been the case for thousands of years. They will always surround themselves with even more idiotic people and easier to control people. And look at all the world. People say in the civilized world. I'm not seeing too much civilization though, because civilization means caring for humanity. There has been no civilization till now. We may speak of civilization about nations that have achieved certain things for themselves to a certain extent, because in no civilization in the ancient times and in nowadays have the people actually truly lived in a happy way. Because war was never far away, famine was never far away. And when we look at things, obviously, treason and corruption and all sorts of other societally impactful events also were not far away. Your government suddenly being overthrown by a conquering country, or people who have been infiltrating your society for long enough that now they claim power and fool the masses, and they impose their new opinions, and even cultural shifts. There have been great cultural shifts. One may say, when we look, for example, in history, when some societies embraced a new religion or a new set of cultures and beliefs, that was a great cultural change. And obviously, there were many fights, right? A collapse of an empire can also lead to catastrophic events. When you look in history, whenever a empire crashed, whether it was a bigger one or more of a local version, every time there were repercussions, there were ripples in the society that were triggered because a lot of people wanted the new, but the majority most likely were still entrenched and would still embrace the old. Nowadays the same ripple effects are going on, because what has happened in the past, well, there is no such thing that would make you immune to those things repeating. See, when people are unconscious, they will always act in the same aspects, and life is nothing else but a cycle. Everything that happens, well, once it happened, definitely it will happen once again. When people are ignorant, they are more susceptible to such things happening. So, if a society collapses and then slowly grows, but it isn't becoming wiser, it will crash soon. Well, sooner or later, depends. If we look at the world, the worst form of government in the end was that of an empire, because an empire always lived somewhat well for its own, or better said, for the wealthier people, while the masses weren't necessarily more elevated, more educated, or at least better living, right? There were more resources, and obviously, when you live in an ignorant world, typically resources will be sent always to reinforce the military, defenses, and well, things like that, because ignorant people will always be suspicious, right? And suspicious people, especially in places of power, they will prefer abusing their power, and typically that means we'd better rid ourselves of the enemies before they do that to us. You never know, right? Because ignorant people don't know much. And, well, they imagine they have foes because who the heck would want to be the foe of an ignorant person? An ignorant person doesn't do much. They won't do anything for themselves. That's why they're ignorant. And that's why they're suffering in the first place. So why would you want to be the foe of an ignorant person? Only ignorance will be foes among themselves because all of them are suffering. And sooner or later it becomes tempting that why not impose suffering on the others, right? At least you can have fun of others suffering, even if it deepens you into the realm of suffering. All of these trends that have been going on because of ignorance now are slowly being, well, I can't say reduced or whatever. They're slowly dwindling in intensity because people are slowly realizing that, there has been enough poison in society, right? First, poison in society begins when people embrace a greater, much greater actually, form of comfort that they have, right? When people started creating their first cities and their first, let's say, villages outside of nature, and they moved away from nature around 4,000 years ago when the first cycle of destruction began, right? The one before Kali Yuga, which is the deepening of the cycle of destruction and moving away from true spirituality. People will simply start believing all sorts of things. When they are no longer in tune with nature, they will feel even more alone. Look at us in here. We are 8 billion people on the planet. Almost no one is untouched by loneliness and loneliness issues, which hits really hard because it actually accentuates in the realm of big cities, of a metropolis. Because the more people there are, the more unsafe you will feel because if you can't trust your family, the people around, the people at your workplace, even the people at home, maybe you're not living with your family, but there are times in which you can't even trust your spouse and you start asking all sorts of questions, right? Then came also the pandemic, which clearly was a sign that, the population had to be woken up. Well, apparently, very few countries realized that from the beginning, and it feels that again somewhere in Eastern Europe and somewhere in Central Europe and even Southern Europe in Italy, there were great voices that tried to make a big impact and kind of ended up making the biggest impact. There were voices in Asia, there were voices in America, but unfortunately there weren't many, but still there were many enough, which means people haven't been fully dormant as some people would believe or would have wanted. And people are now simply waking up. Everything regarding the past is breaking down. Empires of corruption are simply falling down, and people just want more or less of a communion. You see nowadays countries forming communions, old barriers being broken, diplomacy simply springing everywhere. Because first and foremost, you must ensure a certain idea of non-aggression. Then you can simply solve in more peaceful ways the ideas of the past. Because you simply can't change or force a change upon the past. It will always lurk around you. That is why I always tell people don't try to change your religion into another because you've got thousands of generations, well, thousands of people within the past generations that have been through that. So you have a great influence still upon you because of that. Don't try to change the traumas that you've gone through because that's what narcissists want from you. It's never happened. It's just an imagination. It's all in your head. But the experiences you've gone through are still there, haunting you. And not only that, but those of your previous people, right? Your ancestors, they have still an influence upon you. You're never going to be fully free of them except when one simply transcends the cycle of life and death. But the more conscious, the more aware, the more in tune with nature one becomes, well, they will move slowly and surely away from those, and their influence will be less and less. Never 0%, but they will still be less. You will see the moment you start slipping back into the unconscious mind, all of these things will start bubbling up because they've been bubbling up. And just like a dormant volcano, it's never far away from simply bursting up. But the point is, it will take probably thousands of years. Just because one generation has been lucky to not see the volcano blow up. Well, when you look at Pompeii, when you look at other such, tragic volcano eruptions throughout our history, well, once it happened, a lot of people simply suffered, right? There are signs, but if one simply moves away from nature, there will be less communication from nature because in the end, people will come in, will move away from your life. Even your parents will move away from your life. Whether it is because you go into the army and probably rarely see them, or if you go into the secret services and you're not allowed to see your family, or because unfortunately they pass away, well, that's unfortunately unavoidable, or because any other reason, because you move in another state and you have to work for quite a lot of years, right? So that you can afford moving them to your place as well. And well, throughout those years, many things can happen, right? Disasters may strike both your side and at your family, or only at your family. Things can happen in all sorts of shapes and forms. And well, you will see a lot of things. People have been playing too much with nature in order to lie to us that there will be, or there still are, so called climate changes. And we've been polluting nature for too long. And at the same time, there is so much poison in society, starting with water, starting especially with air, starting with the food. Everything that we eat, according especially to some people's agendas, has been poisoned and made so that we are deliberately poisoned and weakened, so that we don't have enough time for ourselves. Everything, even in society, is all about exploitation of the humans. In the socialist school, they would teach that this idea of capitalism means nothing else than exploitation of man by man. So all of these trends of the past, especially the last 2000 or even 2500 years, have belonged more or less to the idea of the age of Pisces, or an age where people simply blindly follow what they are being told. Religion, in a way, it is a blind following because, well, ultimately, a belief means accepting something without a necessity for proof. If one becomes somewhat spiritual, they realize they don't need to attribute creation any shape or form. When you realize creation is part of yourself, not some part or some entity out there at a physical level, one simply understands that creation is everywhere. From the smallest cells that you have, from the DNA that you have, from the DNA that is in each and every one of your cells, to each and everything that you're actually using, right? In the end, everything that you're making use of is basically part of creation. But unfortunately, people simply want to move away from that because they have become accustomed to being alone. Now people are starting to ask questions because, in the end, men and women have both been poisoned in society. Women have been giving birth too long to weak generations of children who became the weak men and the weak women of the future generations, which were less and less capable of handling their own problems. So they simply embraced misery. And, well, misery loves company. This is a bigger problem in countries with larger populations because it is a bit ironical. There are far more people, but they feel far more alone. And when you're not ready for a certain level, but societal changes kind of push you into that, well, the problem is you're going to suffer even more. Humanity wasn't ready for the technology of nowadays because we still have a brain that is wired in the idea of survival, although we've been living in conditions that have separated us from the cycles of nature. We're no longer beings who live specifically in nature and who are always a possible target of predators, right? Now, when technology came, the problem is a lot of the miserable people have finally way more spare time in their life, but they were never ready because now, facing so much spare time, they can only view how much of a failure they are, how much of suffering there is in their life because of multiple reasons. But yet again, when it comes to their ancestral karma, and their own karma and programming, it is hard for a lot of people to simply pull out of their misery. A lot of people simply won't make the shift. A lot of people will simply doom themselves. Some people, you will see mass waves of suicides. There will be many of these. Probably the mass media won't speak it, but a lot of people have COVID anxiety syndrome or other such mental illnesses because when you have women incapable of anything else than just working on social media, well, not all of them, obviously, but when that becomes a trend, a lot of the young men will be taught that women are not worth more than that. There's already enough rapists in the world. There's already enough people who view women as objects. The problem is, people should stop looking at men as them being the problem. The problem is, well, you can't blame it on society because a society is theoretically a collective representation of the individuals within and the corresponding bonds in between them. Because a sick society is representative of a lack of bond in between people, where objects end up as being loved and people end up as being used, right? Objects should be a lesser version of a human because humans will come and will live your life. Objects, especially in consumerism, they're made to last you very little. So they will come and most likely live your life much faster than many humans, especially quality humans. But nowadays it's harder and harder to find a quality relationship, but not necessarily a romantic one, professional one as well. You will see a rise of professionalism because people will actually start wanting again to be part of a society, but not just existing, merely existing, providing something for that society. It is the masculine energy. Masculine hasn't been elevated by the true divine feminine in a very long time because the feminine has been programming itself that it is worthless, it is unworthy of anything, and a lot of societal aspects even led to amplifying that. But society doesn't even need to amplify anything within the feminine because the feminine is an amplifier on their own. So, all of these problems, all of these aspects that I have been enumerating till now, all of these things slowly dwindle away. Most of the people being trapped in between them, they will feel crushed and forced to simply embrace a better form of life. In case you're in such distress, well, the best answers you can find in nature. Take your time, take some spare time, any time of the day, just walk in nature, stay in there. Probably you're not gonna have a Wi Fi or an internet connection, but if you're sensitive enough, you can find a better connection in there. Nature can be very curative. Have you ever tried planting your feet on the ground? Keeping your naked feet on the soil. Because the negative ions that the earth emits can actually have a very great influence on your body. Because positive ions in your body are cancerous and they are cancelled by negative ions. Now, surely it doesn't mean that you're gonna fight cancer, but the point about true medicine is to prevent the disease, not fight the disease. Because fighting the disease means it already is in your body. A lot of shifts in perception will happen and are happening because the medical industry has been turned into a business where you have to fight the disease, aka you have to make people diseased and try to save them, right? Or give them the impression that they will be saved and that other entities are trying to save them. When in fact, well, when you look at many of the medicine, not all, but many of the medicine in the world, they all tend to have some side effects. So all of these changes and shifts are going on in a lot of people's minds. It is finally a time when more aware people, stronger people actually fight for political values and political views. One has to remember that even if such strong people reach a political level, they're not necessarily going to make your life better because the whole society as a whole, wherever you look, in Africa, in Asia, Europe, America, wherever you want to look, societies are on the verge of collapse because they can no longer easily support themselves. People have been led by all sorts of idiots and incapable people for a very long time. So now there are a lot of holes that have to be filled, a lot of wounds to be cured. So the politicians of today, that the more, well, the stronger generation of people, the more aware version that will take time to do better things in society. It's not guaranteed that they're going to make your life anyway better sooner or later. Because rebuilding a society from its ashes, well, most likely your generation, probably even the next generation, may not fully enjoy the fruits of a much better society. But at least each and every one of us can work more or less, sooner or later, towards building a better society for our next future generations. Because ultimately, maybe we may not enjoy life in a better way, but we can ensure the future generations to have a much better life than us. Because that is what it means to be a human. It means having compassion and empathy and acknowledging that there have been many errors in our beliefs and in the beliefs of our forefathers. And humanity also means allowing the newer generations to simply revolutionize the society, because the older generations being ignorant. Ignorance means being prosophobic, or, well, fearing the idea of progress. So they will always fear the younglings because the younglings have a lot of potential. Maybe not all of them, but there's a little genius in everyone. If you teach people that they're not worthy of anything, well, that's going to be a downfall. You will see changes even in certain religious groups. You will see changes at every possible level in the society. Don't call me a prophet. Don't call me someone who can perceive things or foresee the future. These are things that any wise person or any being who's, let's say, more sensitive to life, they will feel these changes sooner or later. Hopefully this video raised a bit of awareness. You are appreciated. Take care, enjoy life, and this being said, Ferencan Board signing out.